Namaskar. Thank you again to Sonali and Sniti for the wonderful sharing of their experience and the tribute to late Pandit Jasraj. Um, Unfortunately, we are running late and can't take question answer for you. And I think Mr. Subroto Bagchi, our guest of eminence for today's program, is online with us. And it is my proud privilege to actually introduce him. He needs no introduction. He's a very well-known person and figure, both, of course, in Odisha and nationally. Currently, he serves as the chairman of Skill Development Authority of Odisha, that's been set up by state government starting 2016. His mission right now is to skill about 15 lakh youth of Odisha, mostly school dropouts, by the year 2024 and make them employable. He holds a cabinet rank minister's position, taking only 1 rupee per year as a remuneration. Under his leadership, Odisha brought the first gold medal for India in the World Skill Olympiad. Odisha was the second state in India in the medals tally. He has initiated an innovation sandbox to create nano unicorns through entrepreneurship, which of course is something that's his forte. As the co-founder of Mindtree, I think is much better known outside of Odisha as this successful entrepreneur. And Mindtree, as you know, is a $1 billion company with more than 20,000 employees, was responsible for creating the Aadhaar platform. But more importantly, he's been also very well known as a great author, a great orator, great speaker. His books like Go Kiss the World, The Professional, The High Performance Entrepreneur, they have been read by many and been inspiring. His latest book called The Cell won the C.K. Prahlad Award and has been translated among other languages into Chinese. As you know, Chinese are very entrepreneurial and they take knowledge from all over the world. And no wonder they're making such fast progress. Mr. Bagchi has 2 honorary doctorates, one awarded by Utkal University for the literature and one by Vishut, the Veer Surendra Sai University of Technology in Odisha for science and technology. He also has an Order of Engineering from University of Florida. His, of course, accomplishments are many and much for us to be proud of. But I'll just say that the first time I had the opportunity to hear Mr. Bagchi speak at the Ravenshaw University, almost more than 10 years back now. And the title of his speech was The Burden of Dreams. And he so eloquently articulated how an institution like Ravenshaw, and I think of SPIC MACAY in that context, was pregnant with this burden of dreams. So he compared that with a mother who carries a child in her womb for 11 months before giving birth. And that is certainly a burden, but it's a burden that the mother carries joyfully and with care to give to the world something precious. And that's what he expected institutions like Ravenshaw to deliver. And today, we are so lucky to have him to deliberate with us, and we requested him to discuss the new education policy and the bold visions articulated in the education policies, such as every child in India should be exposed to our precious art and culture and heritage right from school and also in college. We've also talked about getting rid of the distinction between art, commerce, and science at the +2 or beginning college level and so on. These are very ambitious goals, and I feel personally that SPIC MACAY probably has a major role going forward in helping the government, helping our country achieve these laudable objectives. So in that context, I would request now Mr. Bagchi to share with us his thoughts. And after that, of course, we'll be very happy to take questions from the audience. Thank you.
Shall we start?
Yes, sir. Welcome, Sri Bagchi. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, first of all, it's a great honor that I'm on the SPIC MACAY platform a second time. SPIC MACAY to me is a national resource. It is what every other institution should be. 43-year-old pioneer, path breaking, ahead of its time, committed, conscientious, just distributing itself. It is really a significant institution which I'm sure will continue to play a major role in the creation of India of the future. I want to thank Babita and Dhanada, of course, for inviting me, but I didn't realize that this is a beyond Odisha kind of an event. And of all people, Dr. Kiran said himself, and many of the senior people behind the SPIC MACAY organization would be there. So, you know, with all these, all the elucidation of my personal success that Dhanada gave out, I must tell you that success brings a certain amount of arrogance, and in an arrogant state, I told Babita that I will come in only at 12 o'clock and get out at 12:30, because all of us want to present ourselves as extremely busy people, whether we are busy or not. And then I realized later on, she was very kind, and she said, yes, sure, you know, we understand your busy schedule, whatever that means. But later I realized that Sonali Mishra and Smriti Mishra, I know it is customary to call you people G, but I think other than Dr. Seth, I would be the second oldest in the group. So I'm just taking the liberty of calling you Smriti and Sonali. When I realized that you are going to be there and you are going to perform and speak, I get crashed and I said, no, I can't come in at 12. I'll come much before. And then, like a process of gradual discovery, I realized that the program is rich with self-introduction of volunteers. And I said to myself that what a wonderful way of spending this Sunday. And I'm so glad that I have been here right from the beginning. I do feel that after Sonali's performance and her articulate communication, she speaks like a river in communion with the ocean, where there is energy and there is depth, and at the same time there is a certain level of existential comfort that it's beyond words. And of course, Niti, I've been a fan, and listening to you, I was lifted to a different world. And I don't know how many of you noticed that as she was singing, the curtain, the thin curtain on her window was actually accompanying her. So it was not like the music alone. The curtain was through its movement coming alive. And those who have missed it should see the recorded video, and you will be amazed as to how the whole universe comes together in a statement of harmony where an artist gives herself away. So I wish that rather than me speak, it would have been an unending performance by both Sonali and Smriti, and I look forward to being part of your world as we go forward. I am very fortunate, very lucky that I share space with you, and I come from the same state, and I'm made of the elements that you are made of, though your talent dwarfs me. Today's conversation, I want to talk about 4 distinct issues, themes. NEP is nested in that because NEP we have to look at in context, and in context of not just today, but the context of India of the past, present, and future. So before I talk about NEP, I want to first talk about cultural darkness. And in that, I want to talk to you about my own cultural darkness. And then I would like to tell you about my own cultural discovery, a path on which I continue to journey. And then within the context of the cultural darkness and cultural discovery, I'd like to briefly talk about the national education policy. And then we'll conclude by talking about how SPIC MACAY will have a significant, larger, deeper role to play in the unfolding of a new India through the new education policy. So let's talk about cultural darkness to begin with. You know, we had Nishan Patnaik who talked about his Koraput lineage. I'm the other Koraputia, if you will, because my childhood up till the age of 8 was actually spent in Koraput, Nabarangpur, Koraput, Raigada, and those kinds of places. Koraput of that time did not have schools nearby. It's a very important point that's connected to the new education policy, which very pointedly talks about access, what access means. So I never went to school in Koraput till the age of 8 because I didn't have access to a school. It was not safe to walk to a school. The school nearby, there was no school nearby. Schools were all far away. So what do you do when you don't have a school nearby? Your childhood is full of play, and straying into the shrubs and the jungles and watching the rain come out of the clouds and the rivulets form, the birds and the animal calls. So there's a lot of play. And this again is important because in the context of the new education policy, the power of discovery, power of play comes into a central consideration. And I'm going to talk about that when I focus on the national education policy. So I was living the national education policy's theme without realizing it. I was lucky for that. And Koraput is a big part of that. But I was also lucky to have great parenting, even in a place like Koraput. My father was a very small-time government servant, and my mother was just a matriculate of her time, but they were the greatest parents. And parenting has a connection to the national education policy as well. But my childhood, while it was full of play and full of discovery, I was actually musically not initiated. The only music that I heard were from three sources. One, early in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, before the first rays of dawn would visit the earth, I could hear my father sleeping in the next room actually sing, and he was not a great singer, but he sang without any accompaniment, Meera bhajans and Bhanu Singh's poetry. So even as a 3-year-old child, I would wake up every morning to listen to Maine Chakar Rakho Ji or Gahana Kusuma. And just as my father would wake up every morning singing, either a Bhanu Singh or a Bhanu Singha or a Meera or a Kabir for that matter, my mother would hum, particularly as she combed her hair after her lunch. It was an elaborate process. And she would hum to herself, and she hummed Tagore's songs. She would hum Bankim Chandra's music, lyrics. And I would listen as she sang Dhana Dhanya Pushpe Bhara, or she would sing, Akla Chalo Re, or she would sing some other tune that would come to her mind. So these are two major sources that awakened the idea of music in me. But there's a third major source, and that was listening to Adibasi's sing. and watch Adivasis dance. It's a very important point. I didn't even realize at that time, and I'll bring this point back later, so please be with me. But after the age of 8, I came to school. Finished school in different parts of Odisha, government schools, and eventually went to BJP College in Bhubaneswar. But the school and the college was completely devoid of art, literature, culture, heritage, and music. It has nothing to do with school or college. And that again is something that the new education policy strongly talks about. So, for example, in school, the only time you heard about music is few days before the annual day celebration, because that is when talent hunts would happen as to who can sing, and brief audition, and within 4 or 5 days the preparation happens, the school annual function happens, and then there's no conversation about music. Music is very fringe. In college, I studied in BJP College, and I was actually both lucky and unlucky to have a liberal arts education. Again, a point that the new education policy takes up and says there's no need to have those kinds of strict walls. And it actually says that there must be strong liberal arts education flavor at all levels of education. But talk about BJP College coming to learn liberal arts. BJP College did not have a department of music, and it was at that time the second most significant educational institution in the country. So look at me. You know, I'm a child, and I'm a youth. I was lucky to be in a state like Odisha, but I was in cultural darkness. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. In school and in college, nobody told me that the Sauras are one of the only tribes in the world, fewest of few tribes in the world, who have their own script. I had no idea. I had no idea that 1 in 5 Odia is a tribal, a son of the element or a daughter of the element, who's got every aspect of life living knowledge distilled in harmony that runs in her or his veins. I didn't know that this state had somebody called Salabega, who was one of the greatest devotees of Lord Jagannath, himself a half Muslim and a half Hindu, and child of two different identities. And Sonali, you talked about cross-cultural identities, and imagine that you're talking about Salbega here, whose bhajans are, are the shortest path between us and being one with the divine. Nobody talked to me about it. I didn't understand. I didn't know about the history and lineage of Salbega, and I didn't know about his poetry and his rendition and his lyrics. Sanjukta Panigrahi and Raghunath Panigrahi were our family friends. We met them, at that time, Raghunath Panigrahi had a Lambretta scooter, and Sanjukta Didi would sit behind, and they would stop when they would see us on the road and inquire our welfare. But I never attended the performance. I had no idea why the French were honoring Raghunath Panigrahi for rendering Jayadeva. Who's Jayadeva? I've been a student of history, but no history teacher ever took me to the banks of the Daya River to say this is where the Great War was fought. Nobody took me to the temple of Konark to appreciate it from its multidisciplinary perspective. So the first part of my life, all the way till the age of 30, was a time of cultural darkness. In 1990, I actually went to the United States, and Sonali, again, you're from there, so you'd be able to appreciate. So would all the other people who are on the call from across the world. They will appreciate. Unfortunately, even as we are from a cultural heritage point of view, one of the most gifted civilizations, we are culturally far less sensitive than our average counterpart in the West. I'll explain that in a moment. When I went to the US for the first time in 1990 and lived in the Silicon Valley, my cultural discovery began. And first, you're looking for those cheap CDs, and you go to this big wholesale stores, and you find where the deals are. And invariably, before Christmas time or after Christmas time, for that matter, you find that the CDs of CDs, especially brought to the store for Christmas, being sold away for a song, literally for a song. So I picked up, coincidentally, Western classical music CDs, and started listening to classical music for the first time. And I was listening to Western classical music. And until then, my idea of music was more stuff that you entertain with yourself, light music. Please read light music to a statement. But just as I was getting initiated to Western classical music, somebody gifted me with a cassette produced by the Odisha Center here. It was just about coming in place. And I heard Odisha dance accompaniment music rendered by a whole set of highly talented, gifted Odisha singers. That was a life-changing experience for me, because I used to drive a lot to distant places from the valley. Sometimes you drive for 2 hours, 3 hours. Sometimes you go to attend a conference in Las Vegas, 8 hours. And I would listen to that Odisha cassette over and over and over again. And then I realized for the first time that till then I knew about music as singing, but I began to then appreciate instruments being played. And I realized that nobody has ever told me about the difference between a mridangam and a pakhoj. I had no idea about, how you can pay attention and listen to different musical instruments in the same musical performance, both retaining their identity and merging their identity. So I began to understand and appreciate instruments, which took me to physics as to how instruments were created. Whoever thought about these instruments? How did they evolve? Then came lyrics, and I can go on and on, but beyond the singing and the instruments and the lyrics, one began to appreciate the idea of emotion. What is the role of emotion? The word emotion, if you look at the Latin beginning of that word, it basically has two parts to it, E and motion, and literally means an emotion is a feeling that is capable of moving. Motion is a part of emotion, to move. So, music moves both spiritually, intellectually, physically. Play music and a 2-year-old child begins to move. So there's motion, innate motion. Then we came back from the United States to Bangalore, from where we had gone. And now I was ready to actually explore the many classical music traditions of India, whether it's Hindustani classical, to Karnataki, to, of course, Odissi. Then I also began to understand, the nuances of Odissi dance, to Kuchipudi, to Bharatnatyam. And, then the journey began. So you appreciated the world of the Baul singer. You appreciated the universe of Kabir. And Bangalore, suddenly I realized, is not the tech capital of the world. It is actually a rainforest, and tech is incidental. And because it's a rainforest, that Bangalore invites a certain kind of talent and builds a certain kind of greatness. So the geek and the nerd is only one part of the Bangalore story. So you go to Bangalore and you could go to Ranga Shankara for a theater performance, and somebody will just nudge and say, "Look at that man out there drinking coffee with those school kids there. Now that's Girish Karnad." And look a little beyond, and then you can see, Ananta Murthy. You are Ananta Murthy, or you can see, the great painter Vasudeva. And then you look at somewhere else and somebody will say, "Oh, that is Surupa and that is Vijayani from Nityagram." And then you realize, why is Bangalore rich? It is rich because of its art, literature, culture, and you step aside and then you immerse yourself in Belur and Halebeedu and Hampi, and then the whole thing begins to fall in place. So when we came back to Bangalore, the darkness was getting lifted and the discovery was beginning to happen. But there was another aspect to it. And that aspect was, while we were in US and transiting back and back again, so we have been up and down to the US 3 times. We made home in all these years. Our children were growing up. And for the first time, I learned about the concept of art history because our daughter wanted to learn art history. And I thought, why isn't she learning her English and her maths and improving her, trying to improve her SAT score? What do you do by learning about art history? And then it came time for our older daughter, who went to do an English major in Rutgers University, and she chose the music minor. I was aghast because Bagchis are not known for singing. But music is not just for people who can sing. Music is mathematics, and music is spirituality, and music is literature, and music is history, and music is geography. Music is everything about human existence from time primordial to today and where we will go as a civilization. So when you study music as a minor part of your undergraduate degree, I had no idea. And I saw my daughter, who's not a real musician, not a singer, but she unfolded the concept of music in a different way in my mind. And then our younger daughter brings home a friend, and she is studying English as her undergrad subject. And I ask her, "What do you want to do after this?" And she says, "I'm going to study medicine." I'm again, I'm out of depth as to why an English student in English wanting to study medicine. And then I realized that in United States, you cannot be a doctor without a previous undergraduate degree. And if you have a liberal arts undergraduate degree, you have a special preference. And a few years after that, I realized that medical students, interns, are taken to an art exhibition. And I'm saying, why students of medicine should go to an art exhibition? And then you realize that there's a Salvador Dali painting, and the painting is a totality that you see as you step. But if you pay attention, you are able to see the brush strokes. You can see the individual brush strokes. And then I'm told that as a doctor, you need to see the patient's face as a work of painting. And only if you know how a brush stroke presents itself, they will be able to see a slight discoloration on the face of the patient, and that may have the clue to your prognosis. And if you improve that further, you will be able to distinguish the thermal layers that a patient's face presents. So if you don't appreciate what a painting is, you don't really know how to relate to a patient. It was changing my universe. Along the way, I began to read and understand about sciences like neuroscience and psychology and imaging in particular. And that is where I was initiated into understanding the work of somebody like Howard Gardner, who, for the first time, questioned the math literary intelligence as the only sign of intelligence quotient. Let me pause and ask everybody, are you able to see me? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. Kindly continue.
Yeah. So Howard Gardner from Harvard, last I knew he had something like, you talked about 2 honorary doctorates that I have, and he was supposed to have 19 honorary doctorates for his work apart from real doctorates. So he questioned the idea of, math literary or not math literary, I'm sorry, math logical intelligence as the real intelligence. And he said, look, intelligence is a multifaceted thing. It's not one thing. And he, in fact, propagated the theory of multiple intelligences. He talked about math logical intelligence, which everybody knew about, and equated to intelligence. But he said, no, wait. There is something called literary intelligence. Amitabh Ghosh has literary intelligence. Tagore had literary intelligence. Then there is kinesthetic intelligence. Virat Kohli has got kinesthetic intelligence. Then you have musical intelligence. So if you look at a Bach or a Beethoven, or you look at Sniti and Sonali, you look at Jayadeva, and you look at Raghunath Panigrahi, you look at many of you on this call, you're musically intelligent. And musical intelligence is not about singing alone, but it's about the ability to appreciate and understand and study music, as in my daughter was studying music as minor. And then there is interpersonal intelligence and intrapersonal intelligence. And then there's spatial intelligence, something to do with space. And then there's naturalistic intelligence, flora, fauna. And last but not the least, there is what Gardner talks about, existential intelligence, which is a way of admitting the presence of spiritual intelligence. Howard Gardner's work profoundly impacted me, and talk about my childhood and the cultural darkness. If only there was a Howard Gardner who was shaping my early childhood experience and my adolescence, I realized I would be a very different human being. So why am I talking about Howard Gardner? Why am I talking about multiple intelligences? Because the national education policy, for the first time in the independent India's history, is a document that actually encompasses all these things. The national education policy is a vision document. It is lofty, it is audacious, but its real impact, intended impact, is to create people with multiple intelligences, create people who are connected, people who are entire, people who are not part, but people who are whole. If the national education policy was there as I grew up in my formative years, I would have been a very different individual, and I would not have to go through this long period of cultural deficiency and cultural darkness. As a vision document, it talks about what it may achieve. It is not here and now. At one level, it is about creating human capital for a self-confident, for a capable India for the next few decades. But it is also a document that takes into account all the things that went wrong, including my childhood. But I was born in 1957. So prior to me, India was independent in 1947. From 1947 until 2020, we had all the time to create an educational system and an educational environment in which we won't have to think that music, art, craft, dance, all these things are fringe. They're nice to have. So, talking about the new education policy, you know, I must encourage each individual on this call and others as well to read the new education policy. You know, ideally, you should be reading the new education policies draft, and I can tell you it's a fat, big book that runs into 477 pages. But the actual education policy that was announced in 2020 by the Honorable Prime Minister is a 66-page document. But the reason you should read this is no government propaganda, and this is no government piece of, you know, bureaucratic speak. It is in itself a treatise in learning. If you're interested to know how we learn, why we don't learn, what constitutes learning, all these things are really contained in this absolutely well-written treatise. It is also important because all of us are worried about India. We are all worried about Indian education, but it is like an elephant. We look at different parts of the elephant and confuse that with the elephant itself. But if you truly want to understand why our educational system is broken, what took the what monumental effort it took to break the educational system, you need to read this document, because this document does not gloss over all the things that have gone wrong, including the challenge of successive government failure in thought leadership, in policy, and deals with issues like social challenges, talks about difficulties in terms of corruption and loss of leadership and everything else. The third thing why you should read this is it's an extremely well crafted, I'm choosing the word carefully, and extremely well written document. It is a document that has been crafted over time, so it is not an overnight thing. It does not disown the past. It gives credit. You know, obviously we live in political climates where divisiveness is a badge of honor. If I can't kill you, I can't be alive. If I don't say you are a liar, I can't be telling the truth. If I don't say you are vision impaired, I cannot establish that I am able to see. So unless I put you down, I'm not up. We live in a world like that. But this document, you'd expect, will denounce many things in the past because of divisive politics, but it does not disown the past. It's written by credible people. The draft committee was led by a man no less than Dr. Kasturi Rangan, and ably supported by a whole set of people who are visionaries and who are thinker doers. It is not a work by a big four consulting company. It acknowledges the minefields we have. It acknowledges the failures we have had. It talks realistically about where things can go wrong, but more fundamentally, it goes to the root cause of things. It does not trivialize the root cause in trying to create an esoteric idea about the future. It is politically neutral, and it is, despite all the challenges we have, it is a work of optimism. I want to pause here to tell all of you that whenever I reflect on leadership, I always tell myself that the number one job of a leader is to show hope. The idea of leadership is centered around hope. The number one deliverable of a leader is to create hope, and that is what this document does. The national education policy is a must read for all of us, for every teacher, for every student, for every parent, for every community leader, and every politician. And I'll talk about that towards my end as to why politicians must actually read this document. The document talks about it centers, it actually sits, not centers, it sits on 5 pillars. And these 5 pillars are about access, about equity, about quality, about affordability and accountability. I'm not going to go into great details because you'll have to give me time till midnight tonight. But go back to the point I made earlier about my childhood upbringing in Koraput. Then you realize what is the challenge of access. You look at the high level of girl child dropouts who would not go between secondary school to high school because they're not safe as they walk 5 miles or even 5 kilometers from home. They won't go to school because the schools don't have functional toilets. Okay? So then you begin to understand the challenges of access, equity, quality, accountability, and of course, affordability. And each of these elements have been addressed in this document. But this document starts by talking about Indian heritage, not in any masochistic way, not in any way to say that we are better than others, but for the first time it harps on the cultural darkness that I talked about. So the Indian heritage is so deep, whether it is in mathematics, it's in astronomy, it's in music, it is in art and literature and culture and architecture. If we do not take advantage, many nations, many civilizations don't have that access, and yet it does not present itself as a way of exploring education for us. So it begins by talking about the Indian heritage. And then it talks about the sustainable developmental goals of the United Nations and points out that out of 7 of the sustainable development goals that will have sunset in the year 2030, 4 actually have to do with education. Then it talks about why education needs to be integrated and flexible, and liberal arts as an underlying theme, which basically means art, literature, culture, music, craftsmanship, and vocational training, and all of that part. And despite the fact that out of 30,000 plus words, music appears only 20 times in this document as a word, and dance appears only 19 times out of 30,000 times in this document. And half the time dance appears because it is also part of the word guidance, and guidance as dance. Okay. Despite all that, actually the document is spirited with the idea of music and dance and art and literature and culture. And as a result, it aims at not just incremental change, but transformative change. I want to talk briefly about a couple of aspects of that, because the national education policy is an ocean. Now, the national education policy does not begin by looking at grades and classes. It looks at 4 levels at which learning takes place. And as a child, you require foundational learning. Then as you grow up beyond the age of 8, you require preparatory learning, in which phase you are actually initiated into more formal learning, as in teaching and books. And then at the middle school level, you have to be told about abstraction. By that time, the brain is able to understand abstract concepts. And at a secondary school level, then the learning has to be multidisciplinary. Now, in this whole thing, what makes the new education policy significantly depart from the past is its emphasis on foundational learning. If the foundation is not right, it can lead to higher school dropouts due to many, many challenges. But in this foundational learning phase, which is 3 years to 6 years, which is considered preschool and glossed over except for rich people who can afford to send their children to kindergarten schools and so on, for the majority of the Indian child, this is not part of the educational system. And yet, the report cites the fact that 85% of the brain's development actually takes place between the age of 0 to 8. 85%. After that, the brain physically does not develop. So what we are doing with the child between the age of 3 to 6, from the perspective of multiple intelligence, becomes a do it once, and cannot be revisited kind of an exercise. And of this period, what is the most important thing to understand is while 85% of the brain's physical growth will take place during this period, this physical growth critically depends on nutrition, mother nutrition and child nutrition. Here, I will pause and tell you, had I not come into skill development in the late stage of my life in the last 4 years, I would not have learned about a word called stunting. It is a reasonably permanent brain dysfunction because of lack of good nutrition in early part of childhood. A child's brain does not, particularly the neocortex of the brain, does not evolve, and that part of the brain is the brain that has the mathological capability, has got the judgmental capability, has the literary capability, the linguistic capability. Why am I telling all this? I'm telling all this because 1/3 of the world's stunted children, 1/3 of the world's stunted children are from India. And anywhere between 42% to 46% stunted children come from states like Punjab to states like Odisha. So stunting is a major problem. And how do you deal with that? If a child does not have nutrition, and nutrition until now was considered to be only the world of midday meal, but the child doesn't even have breakfast. And how will that child pay attention in school? So the new education policy talks about the 3 year to 8 year period, actually goes even beyond the 3 year, before the 3 year period, and talks about the challenge of physical brain development, and then relates to all the foundational things that must be in place before a child is able to be ready for formal education and abstract education and then multidisciplinary education. In the paucity of time, I'll tell you that what makes this new education policy significant is that it is not a New Delhi centric document. It is top down in terms of creation of resources, allocation of resources, and oversight, but it is very bottoms up. It leaves a lot of things to the states so that the local nuances can be factored in, local resources can be brought in. It talks about social issues of education, it talks about parenting, it talks about community, it talks about the idea of bringing joy to education, and joy as in art and craft and literature and culture and music and heritage, all the things that SPIC MACAY stands for. It talks about non-formal teacher capacity creation, teacher aids. It talks about the importance of teacher training. It talks about examination reform. It talks about unusual things like building school complexes. So far, we have only talked about, software technology park of India. We have talked about special economic zones, and we have not understood that, look, we could do that same thing to be able to create a new kind of educational infrastructure using the power of co-location and the power of leverage. It talks about the girl child in many, many significant ways. It talks about children with special abilities. It talks about testing, a relook at testing. It talks about exit options and vocational education. It talks about multiple intelligences without actually talking about it. And it's in essence, it talks about a journey back from cultural darkness to cultural discovery. Now, what this document requires is massive widespread dissemination, number one. Number two, it requires a massive political will. Politics is in many ways is deep, but many ways it is attention deficient. Politicians are trained to move from thing to thing to thing. And education is not something that you can build with a short view of time. You necessarily have to have a long view of time. And the danger of having a long view of time is you have to have perpetual commitment to attention. If you can't attend to something physically and mentally, you cannot impact it. So massive political will is required with consistency of attention by politicians, political leaders cutting across lines so that this can be implemented. The third thing is it requires sustained community involvement. Sustained community involvement. Three different words, and I'm choosing the words with care. It enormously depends on teacher training because the best people in our society in the last 7 or 8 decades were not coming in to become teachers. Teachers were not the most looked up people. Like, for example, in the West, if you're a teacher, you're a nurse, you're an ambulance driver, people, or a firefighter, people really hold you up in awe and respect. But that's not the case in our, in our country. So there's a huge gap in terms of teacher capability, teaching leadership. And last but not the least, in today's context, and I could actually have a far longer list, I want to simplify it because in the interest of time, is a quality of books, a quality of material. I have been actually back to school in some sense. Last 1 year, I went back to periodically teach the best kids of the 10th class in the government school where I, for the first time, was enrolled in class 5 in Bhubaneswar. And so I said to myself that I need to go back to that school. And I, last 1 year, have been working with these kids. And then I started reading the textbooks. And I said, who in his or her profound wisdom wrote books like this? Most of the textbooks that we have created are so poorly written. They're a tribute to unimagination. You know, it's not without reason that the kids don't pay attention. So overnight, you cannot rewrite textbooks, and writing a good curriculum, writing a good textbooks, far more making it multidisciplinary, making it multi-sensory is a non-trivial thing. And we are not equipped to do that. So these are some of the challenges and some of the difficulties near term I see. But again, I am curtailing it, keeping the list very short. In this new education policy, now I'm going to switch to the fourth part of my conversation with you. What will SPIC MACAY do? You know, how does SPIC MACAY even remotely fit into new education policy? You know, we should be talking about music and dance and performing for each other. What do we really have to do with the new education policy? 43 years ago, when Dr. Kiran started off creating this institution after his University of Columbia days, where he for the first time was enthralled to see the performance of the Dagar brothers, came back to IIT and started this. Whatever he envisioned, he dreamt of, creating SPIC MACAY as a vehicle is essentially the core of the new education policy. If you love SPIC MACAY, you'll love reading this book. What will come out of this book is really not up to the government. You know, society has to be involved, every parent has to be involved, a teacher has to be involved. This book's idea will require the same level of commitment with which SPIC MACAY has been running for the last 43 years. Whatever you stood for, whatever was considered to be fringe actually. Even today, many people will think that what you do is fringe. But for the first time, your work is not fringe, it is central. It is the critical element, okay, on which the whole idea of transformative approach to education rests. Now, if we look back last 43 years, you stayed with your purpose. You had what the great management thinker Peter Drucker would say, constancy of purpose. You don't create greatness just because of your lofty ideas. You have to stick to the problem. You have to have constancy of purpose. You have to stay with the problem over a long period of time. And that's what SPIC MACAY has done. So over these 43 years, what is important is not just what you produced, but how you did it. So how to is a very critical aspect. And the new education policy to be implemented would require a tremendous amount of how to. Very few organizations like yours have the understanding of how to, because that's the key with which the lock will be opened. And the key right now is sitting in your pocket. That key needs to be held by everybody who's a stakeholder in the country towards transformation of the educational system. Now, what you can do is you have a never before opportunity to be an active partner with the government. But for that, I think an organization like SPIC MACAY will need to reinvent itself. You may be all that I described, but the future is not an extension of the past. 43 years is a long time. I must tell you, as I was getting trained in the 1990s in Japan, in the world of total quality management, my Japanese teachers, they told me that the Japanese believe that individuals and institutions die every 5 years. So you don't wait to die at the end of 60 years or 70 years or 80 years of your life. Actually, you're dying every 5 years. So death here is not a finality. Death is an invitation to begin all over again. So if you look at a Fortune 500 company, every company, unless it has reinvented itself, Fortune 500 company, educational institutions, not-for-profit organizations, unless they every 5 years critically examine their mission, vision, values, and how to, they will become very soon irrelevant. Sometimes irrelevance takes a long period of time, and irrelevance here is essentially about input-output ratio. How much of input are you putting in to generate how much of output? So if every organization dies once in 5 years, and that is the reason, by the way, that the planning system in India, the planning system as set up by the great Prashanto Mahalanobis, was based on 5-year plans. India was run on 5-year plans. Even today, elections are run on 5 years because you outlive your utility. You have to present a new story. So the idea of 5 years is a very significant idea. So if every 5 years we die and institutions die and we need to reinvent ourselves, I think it is time for SPIC MACAY to reinvent itself. And I'm very delighted, I'm very happy to hear from both Babita and from from all of you here, from Dhanada in particular, Babita in particular, that you are in the process of creating a new visioning exercise for yourselves. And I believe that in doing so, you'll do yourself great justice if you actually go through the new education policy, even as you are only a part of it, because then you'll be able to say, what is the critical role we can play? But it's an ocean. It's a problem that is much bigger than has given us apparent power to deal with. But I'm very inspired with what Sonali said a little while ago, and she talked about not to be overwhelmed. She talked about ocean. Standing in front of an ocean, you need not be overwhelmed. You can be part of the waves and part of the sand and part of the wave, the sand, the light, and the wind. And you don't have to feel overwhelmed. The best way to be is to be part of it, to devote yourself, just as Sniti was singing. She was just devoting herself. She was not trying to say, I'm here to prove a point. She was just wanting to be subsumed by the point. So we don't need to be overwhelmed, yet we need understanding. Harold Lasky, the great political commentator, had once said that understanding is the beginning of freedom. And to all of you great people on this call, I would invite you to give yourself some time to read the national education policy so that you understand it, and then that can stir yourself, that can motivate you to see how individually and institutionally you can be an a power of change. You can be an agent of change. So with that, I want to tell you, I'm delighted to be here. I'm grateful that you people gave me this platform. And I really wish that you had given me far less time and given far more time to Sniti and to Sonali. And I regret that we had no time to ask questions to Sonali. So even before you ask me some question, I think we should ask one or two questions to her. So thank you very much. It's been a delight. It's been a joy. And I look forward to be associated with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sri Bagchi. As you are so famously known to be a great storyteller, you've really wonderfully articulated the story of NEP 2020, relating it to your own life. And I can only wonder if someone like you, coming out of 15 years of cultural darkness, could reach this height of understanding and sensitivity towards our art, culture, heritage. What our future generations would be if our new education policy actually gets implemented. So on behalf of SPIC MACAY and all of us, we really, really thank you for taking the time out today. We are so grateful that you stayed for the whole entire session. Heard our volunteers, obviously Sonali and Sniti, of course, deserve your attention. I would like to, of course, we are out of time, but still I would like to recognize several questions and people who have asked the questions, which actually in the end you have pretty much addressed to a large extent. In fact, it's like someone said, it's like telepathy, because they were asking about how NEP 2020 would be implemented and what role SPIC MACAY can play. And to your last part, dealt most of to that point quite a bit. There was a question from Mr. Rakshit Mahanti about your journey in establishing Mindtree, and during this difficult economic crisis, what advice you would have. But I think we may skip that for now. But given that most of SPIC MACAY has got a test, we had you before once in Bhubaneswar in that small event in Jayadev Bhavan, but now that most other people have heard you, I'm sure we'll have another opportunity to hear you again, probably on that topic. There was a student from DAV Unit 8, Anjali Mishra, again asking about how NEP 2020 will be implemented to improve quality of school education, where we wouldn't give importance to marks and degrees. There was Sucheta madam had a question again about implementation. Ricky Srivastava, one of our very senior volunteer who is leading the effort to do this visioning exercise, and he has 2040 in mind, which in fact is the target year for NEP 2020. And we would love to have your input in that process as we get starting. And Ricky had that same question, that how you see SPIC MACAY's role in implementation of NEP 2020. Ayush Modi had a question, when NEP 2020 is going to be executed. Document, the execution is already started in ways and will go on. Yash Upadhyay had a question again about when it will empower our education system. And like that, I think I covered most. Kritika had a question for Sonali about how she got into dance or got attracted into dance. I advise, for lack of time, for Kritika to address it in private chat to Sonali and try get an answer. Salini Nair madam also had a question. So most of course have appreciated your brilliant talk. Guru Sastya Rajashekara, does the NEP also consider the readiness of sociological changes in India? So I hope, and Sami Begum, thank you for the good message about NEP. So I think I covered most of the questioners, and asking question is a very important, obviously, quality, and I thank all of them. Now, having heard the questions, you might want to say a few more words, and then I would like to actually invite Professor Kiran said, if he's still around, to kind of wrap this up, probably in form of a few words of that comes to his mind, and maybe a token of thanks from him. So would you like to go first, Mr. Bagchi, just to address the questions overall in some sense? Subroto ji, are you with us?
Yes. So,
Yes.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Please go ahead.
Look, thank you for all that volley of questions, but I must
Right.
tell you that you know, after the song has been sung, you don't want to listen to the musician over and over again. I have sung the whole song, or whatever was to be sung, and I would seriously ask all of you to read the document that I talked about, not because of any other reason, but because, as I was telling you earlier, it's a great treatise on how we learn, what goes into learning. Even as you have grown up, you'll be able to look back in time and connect the dots. All I'll tell you is that it's a transformative document. It will take a long time to come into full play. And I hope that we have the political will and the society and community and parents. If parents, I was listening to Sonali and I was listening to Sniti, and I was saying if parents could be impediments to them, would have come in the way, they won't be where they are today. But 98% parents would freak out even today if a brilliant child does not go to become an IT engineer, but says, I will devote my whole life to Odissi classical music, okay, or Odissi dance, right? So parental responsibility to bring about transformative change is huge. So society has to come together, system has to come together, bureaucracy needs to pay deep attention. Teachers have to understand that more of the same will not do. And they need to have the motivation and they need to have a leadership. It's a very aspirational document. It basically asks 1.3 billion people to raise above their own limited interest, their own limited motivation, to say that education is a essential requirement for the continuity of a people, and I have a role to play in that. The reason I'm telling you all this is going to take a long time. So I can give you the dates that so and so thing is being aimed for 2025, so and so thing will happen in 2030. Committees have been set up as they are really being set up. For example, in government of Odisha today, a high-powered committee of secretaries have been put together that has invited outstanding people from across disciplines to come and say, how do we make sense of this 477 draft pages or the 66 pages of the document itself? What do we have to do as a system and society to make it happen? So a lot of deep work will have to go into making this happen. And barring probably our friend from DAV school, I forgot her name, most of us will actually not largely benefit being in school and college because we are probably almost on our way out of college. But we'll all have some role to play in it, amplifying it, but bringing in the collective voluntary capability of an organization like SPIC MACAY. Let me pause here and again reiterate that you really need to read it. It's not a document or not a subject that we can skim on the surface. Education, as Dr. Seth will agree, is not a superficial construct. Okay.
Yeah.
So the starting point is for you to have some depth and devote some time to understanding this document.
Thank you so much. I think that's a wonderful advice to close this. But I'll request before we end, Professor Kiran Seth to kindly share a few words and his thoughts on your deliberations. And thank you on all our behalf. Thank you. Dr.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can see you and hear you. Kindly go ahead, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for, first of all, I'd like to thank Subroto ji for the lovely talk. He gave very, very thought-provoking very thought-provoking ideas, which we'll try to implement in whatever we can in SPIC MACAY. Sonali, of course, gave a very lovely talk also. She performed very nicely, but she spoke very, very well. And Subroto ji has already referred to that. Sniti sang very nicely. Only one request to Sniti is that you're so talented, you have so much going for you. I just want to tell you what Ustad Nasir Aminuddin Dagar said. He would say that 7 जन्म लग जाते हैं, 7 जन्म लग जाते हैं शास्त्रीय संगीत को थोड़ा सा समझने के लिए. So my request to you is, I know it's a very tough thing in this day and age, but if you focus on that, and you know, it takes a lot of effort. Ek saade sab sade, sab saade sab jaye. So if you go into too many things, you may not get that thing which that asar which comes in, say for example, through what we got from Pandit Jasraji ji's music or from some of the greats. There's no harm in trying to be one of them. Okay, and all the best. Bye-bye. I again thank Subroto ji, whom I remember very, 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 I remember him from the time that I came to Bhubaneswar, and we had a very nice interaction with him. I once again thank you. Namaskar. Namaskar.
Thank you, Dr. Seth. Thank you for your Asirvad and blessing for the young artists, and for thanking Sri Subroto Bagchi ji. Srishan, do you want to close this or?
No, sir, you can continue, please. We can end this.
No, I think we are at the end of today's session. So I once again thank everybody. It's been pretty long session. I thank all the participants. I thank particularly Sonali, Sniti, and Sri Subroto Bagchi ji. I hope to see you again in future with SPIC MACAY. Thank you very much. Namaskar.